This topic focuses on the cognitive skills that tend to enable critical thinking. Let's take some time now to look at these ideas in detail. We can define critical thinking as follows. Critical thinking is the process of purposeful, self-regulatory judgment. This process gives reasoned consideration to evidence, contexts, conceptualizations, methods, and criteria. This is the definition developed in the Delphi Report, a large global multidisciplinary study commissioned by the American Philosophical Association in 1990. The Delphi Report, written by Dr. Peter Fazione and colleagues, identified 6 cognitive skills that give rise to critical thinking: interpretation, analysis, evaluation, inference, explanation, and self-regulation. Let's define each of these terms now. Interpretation means to comprehend the meaning or significance of something. For example, one could interpret the quality of a healthcare media campaign. Analysis means to identify the intended or actual relationships among concepts and information. For example, we could analyze a health program in terms of its intended health benefits or its strength as a prevention strategy. Evaluation means to assess the credibility of statements or to assess the logical strength of statements. For example, when we see a new claim about the merits of a certain diet, we might evaluate the claims being made based on our background knowledge of nutrition or based on reading other articles. To infer means to identify evidence needed to draw reasonable conclusions, to form hypotheses, or to deduce the consequences of evidence. For example, if people at risk of cardiovascular disease show improved health outcomes when they participate in an ongoing exercise program, we might infer that an active lifestyle is beneficial for individuals at risk of cardiovascular disease. To explain means to state the reasons of one's reasoning or to justify that reasoning. For example, I could explain why I believe an active lifestyle is beneficial for people at risk of cardiovascular disease by citing evidence on the effects of exercise on weight, blood pressure, or life expectancy. Self-regulation refers to consciously monitoring one's own cognitive activities, that is, to be aware of one's own critical thinking. The Delphi Report went even further and described 16 critical thinking cognitive subskills, with 2 or 3 relating to each of the cognitive skills we just discussed. Let's dive a little deeper into the 16 critical thinking subskills. Under interpretation, first let's consider categorization. One way to understand the meaning of something, or to interpret it, is to formulate categories or distinctions. That is, to categorize the object that you are trying to interpret, or to distinguish it from other objects. This helps you to develop frameworks for understanding. We can form categories or distinctions using the cognitive skills of compare and contrast. Compare and contrast are very important cognitive skills in critical thinking. For example, I've gone to 3 dentists in the past 10 years. My original dentist, a new dentist whose office was closer to my house, and a third dentist who has advanced facilities for dental crowns. I knew my dentist was very good, but it was not until I experienced the other 2 dentists and compared and contrasted my dentist with them in terms of technical skills and clinical reasoning that I understood that my dentist is not only very good, he's outstanding in terms of his clinical insights and decision-making relating to clinical dentistry. Comparing and contrasting him with the other two dentists allowed me to better interpret his practices and attach new and more critical meaning to my dentist. This example illustrates the power of compare and contrast. Next, decoding significance. Another approach to understanding the meaning of something is to detect and describe its functions or purposes, that is, to decode its significance. For example, children and adults may not be motivated to use dental floss. Do you think they could describe the function or purpose of dental floss as distinct from the function of a toothbrush? Perhaps not. Perhaps if people understood the significance of the dental floss in terms of cleaning the surfaces between the teeth, the very surfaces that toothbrushes can't access and that are frequent sites of decay, perhaps that greater awareness of the purpose of dental floss would lead people to see dental floss in a new light. That is, to attach meaning to dental floss that they hadn't previously appreciated. They would have a new, critical understanding of the importance of dental floss in preventing tooth decay. Clarifying meaning also leads to interpretation. This is the practice of paraphrasing or making explicit and removing confusing, unintended vagueness or ambiguity. Let's take another look at the definition of critical thinking presented above. It appears that the authors of the Delphi report put a great deal of thought into this carefully worded, precise definition. No doubt they gained new insight into the meaning of critical thinking as they crafted this precisely worded, comprehensive, and explicit definition. This suggests that careful expression, through writing, can enhance critical thinking. Recall that analysis means to identify the intended and actual relationships among concepts and information. The cognitive skill of analysis involves carefully examining ideas by defining terms and comparing or contrasting terms or ideas. For example, a cancer program might be focused on screening versus early diagnosis versus diagnosis. A cardiac program might be focused on prevention or rehabilitation. In both these cases, it's important to define the terms as a foundation for valid analysis. Taking the time and effort to carefully examine and define terms is essential to being able to analyze concepts and information. Next, detecting arguments. Analyzing a program or plan or concept also requires that you determine whether statements are intended to express an opinion or a point of view. For example, in the example above relating to the cognitive skill of inference, we said that if people at risk of cardiovascular disease show improved health outcomes when they participate in an ongoing exercise program, we might infer that an active lifestyle is beneficial for individuals at risk of cardiovascular disease. You may have detected that these statements expressed a point of view or opinion, that is, that exercise is beneficial to health. After first detecting an argument or point of view, the next step is to critically analyze the argument by identifying and differentiating the intended main conclusion, the reasons advanced in support of the main conclusion, further premises and reasons advanced as backup, additional unstated assumptions, and the overall. This analytic approach is very important in healthcare and health research in that it provides an approach to identifying best evidence and differentiating it from weak evidence or opinion. These distinctions are essential in terms of providing a sound basis for decisions regarding investments in health services, health systems, and health policy. Recall that evaluation means to assess the credibility of statements or to assess the logical strength of statements. Evaluation involves, first, assessing claims, that is, recognizing the factors relevant in assessing the degree of credibility of information or opinion. For example, consider the factors that would be relevant in assessing the credibility of the claim that a healthy breakfast improves school-based achievement among elementary school children. Relevant factors would include what is meant by the term healthy breakfast, demographic considerations arising from the fact that school-age children are a heterogeneous group in terms of socioeconomic context, the definition of school-based achievement, for example, standardized tests versus social engagement, to name a few. In a similar vein, evaluation involves judging whether the basis for an argument justifies accepting it as true. An argument is often comprised of a series of statements that are related to each other. Assessing arguments includes assessing the validity of the relationships between the steps of the argument. Does Statement 1 provide a logical basis for Statement 2? Similarly, does Statement 2 provide sufficient logical foundation for Statement 3 of the argument? Recall that inference means forming hypotheses based on knowledge. Inference involves first querying evidence, that is, judging what information is needed to judge whether an argument is true. Consider the argument that cigarette smoking is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and therefore cigarette smoking reduces life expectancy. To judge this argument, one would need to have evidence supporting, first, increased rates of cardiovascular disease among people who have a history of smoking, and two, reduced life expectancy among individuals with cardiovascular disease. Inference also involves formulating multiple alternatives for resolving a problem. This can also be thought of as divergent thinking. Consider the example that people in remote regions of Ontario have less access to certain health services than people in urban centres. One approach to this would be to provide incentives to health professionals to practice in remote regions of Ontario. Another approach, not mutually exclusive with the first, would be to provide health services to remote regions through technology-assisted services linking health professionals in different geographic regions. Finally, inference involves determining what position, opinion, or point of view one should take on a given issue. This judgment is based on having examined the existing evidence in relation to what evidence you deemed necessary to support a given argument. Explanation is the critical skill involving three subskills. First, stating results. That is, describing the results of one's critical reasoning so as to analyze, evaluate, make inferences based on, and monitor results. Explaining results to trusted colleagues and to oneself can be helpful as early steps in preparing to describe results to a larger audience. Through engaging with others, you can seek feedback which you can use to enhance the clarity, organization, and impact of your statement of results. Justifying procedures means to describe the considerations you used as a basis for forming your interpretations, analyses, and inferences. For example, if you came to interpret the meaning of a rural health program by contrasting it with an urban health program, describing this thought process will be a powerful step toward critically conveying your understanding to others. Presenting arguments means to give reasons why you have accepted a point of view or made a judgment in terms of the evidence you considered and the logical reasoning you used in examining the evidence. Finally, what subskills are involved in consciously monitoring one's own cognitive activities or self-regulation? First, it is particularly important to reflect on one's own reasoning and verify both the results produced and the correct application of the cognitive skills involved. For example, recall that we talked about the power of the cognitive skills of compare and contrast. An approach to self-examination could involve you reflecting on a challenging judgment that you were asked to make recently, and to ask yourself whether, upon reflection, you compared and contrasted it with other situations in trying to interpret or assign meaning to what you were judging. How was that challenging judgment similar to other judgments that you've made in the past? How was it different? Second, where self-examination reveals errors, a critical approach involves designing approaches that you can adopt to remedy or correct, if possible, those mistakes and their causes. For example, if upon reflection you realize that you tend to make judgments before you fully define the terms of an issue, you might work on coaching yourself to pause and write out the key terms of the issue at hand, and then ask yourself which of those you may not fully understand.